and we're talking about M, directed by Fritz from 1931. A bit of a run through here. This is a film about a child killer in Berlin in 1931. Based kind of on a true story of a serial killer by the name of Peter Kurtzen. But Fritz Lang would deny this, but then like later on would confirm this. Fritz Lang is kind of a questionable source in general. But so anyway, for the last 8 months in Berlin, an unknown man has been going around killing children. And sometimes the bodies are found, sometimes they're not, and we don't know what he's doing to these children, but it's left to our imaginations. The police are kind of running out of leads. They're just basically targeting organized crime, hoping to shake something loose, just to act like they're doing something in the face of public scrutiny. People are freaking out. They're seeing men near children, and they assume the worst and are just like, I don't know, full mob mentality, wild crowd mode. So the police are just, again, targeting the underground, racketeering, gambling, all the usual hot spots. And of course, this is taking some money out of the pockets of these criminals, and they're sick of it, and they start trying to figure out what they can do while the police are trying to solve this case through the old-fashioned forensics of fingerprints and gathering information, pulling up names of like people who've been released from mental institutions to see if maybe anyone who's been cleared maybe doesn't deserve to be in the clear. And the criminals come up with an idea of essentially a beggar surveillance system, basically using what the film doesn't really underline, which is basically World War I veterans who are crippled and iterant, and they're just like, they have nothing else better to do, but they're going to be paid off. And hey, if you help us find the killer, we're going to give you $1,500, that type of thing. This gambit actually does pay off, as one particular beggar who sold a balloon to Mr. Hans Beckert, played by Peter Lorre, to him and a little girl that Elise Blackman, I think her name was. He sold them to her while whistling a familiar tune, which is Halls of the Mountain King. He hears it, and this leads to a chase sequence, a cat and mouse-ish kind of thing, where he's being followed. We get where the M comes from, which is a chalky handprint M that gets put onto his back, which is how they're able to follow him through the city. Around the same time, the police have cracked the case. They've got a lead going to Beckert's house while he was away, realizing that he's been writing these notes from there. And he fits the same cigarettes that he was smoking there. But the gangster types, they catch up to him first. They corner him in an office building where they're able to bring all their facilities together, like their ability to break into a building. And they find him, haul him out. They then bring him in front of a kangaroo trial with no intent of letting him leave alive. The police find one of the guys that was left behind at the office building after they had taken Beckert away, question him. He gives up the whole thing, and they kind of show up in the nick of time, and they bring Beckert up to real trial. But we never actually find out what his sentence is, what's going to happen to him, and a grieving mother just calls out to us to save the children, essentially. See, for my synopsis this time, I'm trying to go off from my memory rather than reading a Wikipedia entry.
Yeah, I liked it.
More naturalistic.
Yeah, it feels right, Jared.
It feels just right. So hopefully people can tell me if that works or not, better or not. So first thing I'll say about this film is that it's the earliest film so far we've watched in our creep, as it goes back to 1931. The most previous oldest movie we watched was actually the first film we watched, which was Grand Illusion, which was 1938.
I thought Spinal Tap was before that.
Oh, from what, 1911?
Oh, shit. Nice. Yeah.
So I've seen this movie a few times. I rented it on video way back when from the library because it just sounds awesome. It's like kind of that just outside of the German Expressionist period. I'd always heard of this Fritz Lang character who made this movie Metropolis, this crazy sci-fi movie. And Peter Lorre, like I think I mentioned last week, talking about like being a kid, being drawn into like weird looking dudes. Peter Lorre fits into that. He's like, if you had to, I mean, I think as a kid I was drawn to him because I would like to draw a picture of him because he's like bulgy eyed, round faced. He's got this weird voice, and it's like I thought he was wicked, like him and Vincent Price, like they like went hand in hand, and they even did those Roger Corman movies together. There's like The Raven or whatever. So I always like thought he was really neat. So I rented this on VHS, and it turns out I learned actually watching one of the special features on this Blu-ray that what I watched was a English recut of the film, because it actually opens up with an opening title credit sequence where it's like the hand with the M on it, but it has like the opening, an actual opening credit scenes with like the credits of the actors, and it's all with the Halls of the Mountain King music playing over top of it, and then the movie starts. It's very like weird because I totally forgot about that till I was watching this little thing on the history of the physical history of M and like its different edits and whatnot. And yeah, I thought the movie was really cool back then. And then it had been a few years since I'd watched it. My friend Corey, I think we bought it on DVD after Criterion re-released it, and watched it then. Thought it was pretty good. And then I haven't watched it since, and that was like 8 years ago. So in the last few days, I've now watched this film 3 times, once with commentary. I'm just like delving in, man. Just digging in deep.
You're doing it.
Because I felt like the first time I watched it, there was something missing for me, and I couldn't really quite put my finger on what it was. Like, it was just like, oh, this movie's kind of like slow paced and kind of, I don't know, just like slow. I couldn't really get into what was going on, and I was kind of like underwhelmed almost by it. And I was like, what the hell's going on? And then I watched all the special features on it, and then I listened to the commentary track. Wasn't a great commentary track. There was like these guys talking about like the theme of the circle, and I was just like, oh, this is not that interesting. I realized when I was like going through the library collection at work that we didn't have like the best selection of books on Fritz Lang, let alone on this film. And I was like, kind of like, really? Like, considering how well regarded M is, I was expecting a lot more. The one book I grabbed on it, it's like Fritz Lang, his films and his life or something like that. And there's like an entire chapter on this book, and all it is about his use of sound. Like, and it's like a thorough, like, scene by scene beatdown on sound.
Yeah, I dig it.
And yeah, so I was like, well, what the hell is this movie about? And then I lent you my copy, and then I was like, oh, it's on YouTube. And I felt this like inclination, I should watch this movie again. And that's when the movie clicked for me. Because that's when I started really noticing like the visual stuff. Excuse me for my dry throat.
Gross.
And like, yeah, no, I just started like being like, oh wow, like this is like such like a graphically complex movie. They used to like hands and like weird like close-ups and documentation and faces. I don't know. That's when the movie all started really falling into place for me. But maybe you can continue, RJ, while I drink some delicious ginger ale.
Ooh, is that Schweppes or is that Canada Dry? It's Schweppes, people. False alarm. It was not Canada Dry.
Yeah, Diet Ginger Ale Schweppes, yes.
So lame, Jarrett. So my thoughts on this movie. I'd never seen it before. And as you've mentioned before, we have had a dry spell. Well, I have. A dry spell of movies that I did not like. Movies that were not good. And I can say that now, finally, we are back to fucking good movies. Finally. After like 4 or 5 movies that I just hated. Well, not hated, but I was like, why are any of these movies in here?
Underwhelmed.
I was watching this and I was immediately sucked in. I was like, fucking right. I was like, this looks amazing. You see it right at the start where like this whole movie has it, but I noticed right away like his long static shots where it's just like stills of things, and it really comes through really well at the start when you see the first kid get abducted, and then it shows like the mother setting the table and stuff, and then you just have like like a 10-second shot of like the empty plate in the chair, and then the 10-second shot of like an empty hallway, and then like the old, like wherever he took the kid, you have an empty shot of that as well.
Well,
Like
we get
it's fucking great.
you get the field shot, and then the ball
Yep.
rolls out from behind the bushes, and then it
Yep.
cuts to the balloon caught in the like electrical
Yep.
tower, and just blows away. And it's like a weird. Oh yeah, yeah. No, it's pretty excellent opening sequence, and there's no
Yep.
sound. And like,
It's awesome. Yeah, that's the other thing. Like what you were saying with the sound, that was one thing I noticed a lot too. Is it cuts a lot to like almost silent film because there's just no sound at all. For it does it a couple times and it's so effective. Like I wish people did that now.
yeah. Well, so this is Fritz Lang's first sound movie.
Yeah, that's what
yeah,
I thought.
yeah, he resisted it for because when he made it's like Woman in the Moon, that like he like they wanted him to make it a sound movie because like by that point like that's like 1929, 1930, sound was available. They're like, yeah, you got to do that because that's what people are paying to see. And he was like, no, I don't want to do it. Like he was like
Right.
old school, right? Like he'd been making movies for the last like 15 years, and he's like, I don't want to give that up. So yeah, no, they. So that movie didn't do well, and so finally, I guess with M, he's like, "Fine, I'm gonna make a movie about a child killer,
Yeah.
and it's gonna have
Yeah.
sound."
That's the other thing I noticed, like, or that I thought right away. I was like, man, this is some dark material for the 30s. Like I know there's stuff like that out there, but in my experience, a lot of the stuff I've seen, like pre-World War II, it doesn't really get into things like child murderers and Peter Lorre looking motherfuckers and stuff like that. But yeah, this movie's fucking amazing. All the long shots, I'm just a sucker for that kind of stuff. Like just like I said, long static shots of just nothing.
Yeah.
Or it's like open spaces, or you get a scenery shot. He's also a master of certain overhead shots. There's lots of very nice overhead shots of streets and people like converging onto each other from alleys. I think, yeah, the sound is fucking awesome. The themes are wicked good. In like the sound in the silence, but also just the use of like whistling. And it's not like the obvious one where it's like he whistles when he abducts kids, but like
Yeah.
I also noticed it when they were using the beggars, and the beggars were like whistling to each other from like
Oh, yeah?
streets away, like to alert that the guy was like coming across. Like I
Yeah.
thought that was really cool. Like it was just like, hey man, we're using whistling again. Isn't that neat? Like stuff like that I thought was really cool. But yeah, his transitions between scenes are awesome. He does a really nice thing that I talked about it before. Like the other time I noticed it also was in High and Low, where like it's a common thing now, but you'll be seeing scenes play out, and then it'll like go into other scenes, but the voiceover is the same throughout. So it's like a guy talking, and then you see like a sequence of different scenes kind of weaving into each other.
During the procedural part,
procedural.
yeah, because the whole the first part of the movie, it's like you get the dramatic opening credits stuff like that where it's just like a painting of the hand, which I thought, like, I was like, whoa, I don't remember that. Like that's really nice, and it's just like blackness, and it's just a film by Fritz Lang, and then it just like cut, and then you get the blackness, and then the girl singing, and then it's just this shot of these girls singing this morbid little song, and then it's like an overhead shot, and then it pans kind of over to like the mother saying like, don't sing this horrible music, and then they kind of mutter after she leaves, and then go back to singing, and then you get those long I think I described it as like just like the stillness in the sound instilling dread. Like it's just like because it plays like a silent film, but you know there's supposed to be sound there, and it's actually like watching it now, it's the absence of the sound that you expect now in movies that like is like kind of off-putting. In the one documentary I've already mentioned before, like the about the physical history of M, there was like I think when it first came to America in the 50s, they actually put in like Dolby sound, like they put in sound effects into over the film. So like the scene where like the cops are kind of raiding the thieves' den, and there's like it's like all played silently when you watch it in the movie, but in the American release of it initially, there was like sound effects like cars screeching and like bad footsteps like overdubbed on top of it, and like weird like just like sounds are like really unnecessary because like visually you see it and you know it's there. And it's like, well, you don't need that. Like, it doesn't even matter if it's
Mm-hmm.
there or not, which is hilarious because now everything is like so like the sound design of everything is so minute. Like everything is there or fleshed out and like overly
Right.
loud and stuff like that. Like it brings attention to itself.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, that opening scene goes right into like into the procedural part.
Right.
Where like and it's like, yeah, you get like them talking over stuff and you're getting to see the actually exactly like in High and Low of like that the actual police doing the procedural police work, like going to the places, and there's like the
Mm-hmm.
voiceover narration carrying over what those things were,
Right.
and it's a way to
Yeah.
compress information. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, that's awesome. And then another cool way he showed that too is like he like did this thing where he jumped between different like groups kind of. So it was like you had the scene where all like the crime bosses are talking,
Yeah.
and then you have the scene where all the cop bosses are talking, and they're talking about the same stuff, but it bounces back between the two groups kind of where
Yeah.
it's like they're like, how do we find this guy, and it bounces back to the other group and it's like, we gotta like do it like this, and then it bounces back. Like I thought that was really cool to see as well, like because again that like that's something that you see in TV or movies now, but for this early on it was like, oh man, that's super awesome. Like
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything like that earlier than that, I guess is what I mean to
Yeah.
say.
Well, because I mean, this movie is like, I mean, it basically, in a lot of ways, like it streamlined, invented the police procedural and the serial killer film,
Yep,
pretty much.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's-
so from what I've seen about the old ones, this is the best one yet.
Yeah.
I may be so bold to say, Jarrett, that this is one of the better movies we've watched so far, even. Top 5 for me, for sure.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
That's-
I really like this, and I was not in the mood yesterday.
Oh.
Tired from Christmas shenanigans, like
Yeah.
just doing stuff all day for like 5 days. And it was like last night, I was like, the last thing I want to do is watch a movie. And I looked and it was 2 hours long, and I was like, oh no.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
But no, it scooped me right in, and I was like, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
It's good stuff.
It's yeah. It's like I said, like I don't know what like when I first rewatched this movie this weekend, I think it might have just been like watching like Christmas movies and being like exhausted and like
Yeah.
kind of like not like I'm like, all right, gotta watch M, and I watched it and I was kind of like, something for this is missing for me. And then I couldn't put my finger on it, like, and I was kind of like, oh man, RJ's gonna hate this movie now. And I was like,
Nope.
no,
Yeah.
and this is going
Yeah.
my thought process. But then like when I actually sat down and was like watching it, like where I had it on my laptop, watching it, just like the YouTube version, which actually looks pretty good. And like my full attention was just on it, and like, it was like right up to my face, and I couldn't like, oh, let's see what's on my phone. Let's just take a look at other things because I've seen this movie before, and then it's like not working for me. But like actually just sitting there watching it and like looking for those visual cues and like just like
Right.
print screening constantly and like making Instagram posts, and I was like really like into this movie all of a sudden, being like, man, I love this movie. Like it just like it
Yeah.
totally like turned around for me in a lot of ways because I was just like, yeah, there's like so much, there's like so much going on here. It looks so good, and like. What was I going to say with it? So like my friend Lawrence, actually like about 4 years ago, I guess he was taking a film studies class and he wrote a paper on this movie. And because I was talking to him about this, seeing like, man, there's really not much written about this movie, and I'm kind of like bummed out by it. And he's like, well, I'll send you what I've got. And I read his paper, and it's actually like one of the better things I've read about it, because he just talks about how it's like this is like a really pessimistic movie. And like that goes
Oh,
back
yeah.
to what you were saying, like, man, this movie's like fairly dark for what it is. Because I mean, like, there's no answers in this film. So like the film was written by Fritz Lang's wife at the time, Thea von Harbo, and like, she actually wrote like a ton of stuff with him, like Metropolis she worked on. Their relationship didn't fall apart till Testament of Dr. Mabuse, which is a future Criterion creep.
Yes, it is.
And like
That's
apparently,
Chris Nolan favorite.
yeah.
Sorry.
I was really, I was like thinking about watching some more Fritz Lang stuff for this episode, but it's just the wrong time of year.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's a bunch of his stuff that I haven't seen for a while, or I own and I haven't watched, like Mabuse the Gambler and stuff like that. But then like, actually his like later stuff I actually think are even like in some ways just as good, if not better. Particularly The Big Heat, with which has got Lee Marvin in it.
Ooh.
And then there's his one film, Scarlet Street, with Edward G. Robinson, that's really good. Yeah, Fritz Lang, he has quite the filmography behind him. So yeah, like one thing I'll mention, I guess now is I guess like Peter Lorre could not whistle, so the his wife. So Thea Von Harbo did the whistling for the film.
I noticed that. You can tell like if you actually are looking at his lips. I don't know why. I just did, like, whenever I heard the listening, or the whistling, I looked at his lips. I was like, I wonder if he's really doing that. And then you can tell like he's trying to, but it's not totally in sync. But no, you're totally right about the pessimistic stuff. Like, I was also thinking like it's neat that they like. It's not like an examination of mental illness, but they're actually talking about this shit. And like people even today like don't acknowledge mental illness in like the way that it should be. Like, you know what I mean? Like compulsion and like just like he like his whole like plea at the end, he's like, I can't help it. He's like, I don't want to do these things, but I have to. And then, you know, people still respond like that. It's like, fuck you.
Well,
it's like,
yeah, well, I mean, like I was like, yeah, like things I was thinking about while watching this again was just like basically pedophilia fears and stuff like that. I mean, it's like this step below child killing, but we kind of know in this movie that there was probably some sex acts also occurring, because generally they're not isolated. It's not like in a Nightmare on Elm Street where it's like he's just a kid killer. He doesn't touch them until later on in the modern remake or whatever. But it's like the same, like that mob mentality. I mean, in our own backyard, there was like this like horrific attack on like a woman, and like and so I guess I'm jumping ahead here, but so there was I also watched the M remake from 1951.
There's a remake.
There's an American remake of it called M. It's from the same producer. He wanted Fritz Lang. They actually wanted initially to do it, but he had no interest. He's like, well, I already made the movie. Why would I do it again? Which is the right answer. But then another guy, Joseph Losey, directed it, and I watched it, and it's actually good. Like, it's good. It's not M good, but it's actually it's a good, like, pulpy, like Los Angeles set story. It's the exact same story, but there's actually a really good line that's like, I think it's actually the best line of between the two movies, where like kind of like the safecracker character, he's got like the line where he's like, well, you know, like the public, they don't care about us. They don't care about us breaking the law. Like, they only worry about us when it's in the newspapers, or like they're putting a spin on it that we actually care about what we're doing. But when there's a child killer, people really care, and they want results, and they want them caught right now. And I'm like, I was like, wow, that's like super smart. Like, I've never actually seen anyone say that in a film before. Like, that's like, I don't know. It's like completely accurate. Like, people don't care about it. And like I was saying, like in our own backyard, this like woman was attacked, like brutalized, and like people freaked out. Like, if you went on like Facebook comments, people were nuts. Like, and they're just like, people turn violent, and like this person just be murdered, and like there should be no trial. There should be dead, like outright.
I'll also say, just to set a little bit of background here, or not background, but context, like where we live, not a lot goes on. Like, the majority of our population is senior citizens, so it's pretty quiet around here. So
well, we're kings of the city. And,
yes, correct.
Yeah, and so anyway, so this like something like this is like, there's really no, like, this doesn't happen often, and when it does, like, it brings out like people, like, and like kind of the worst in people and best in people, because you find out how much people care about the community and like the safety, and like they want the community to be safe, but at the same time, there's people who are just like, they're just like violent, and like there's like I talked to people who like knew knew of the victim, and they were like yeah, some of my friends and we were talking about going out there and like finding him. I'm like, well, how would you know who he is? Like, you're just gonna beat somebody up? It's like, it was nuts. Like, the mob mentality is like a real thing that like I don't understand. But yeah, so in this film, I mean, it depicts like there's no answers in this film. I mean, there's like no solution. Like, the film like ends itself before, other than like, we have to think about the children. Like, we have to, like, that woman's like call at the end. And in the 1951 remake, there's like this, like, they're watching they're watching television, and there's like a little film that's like, this is what your kids shouldn't do, and it's like Edgar Wright style, don't get into cars and get rides, don't, and like, it's like hilarious. Like, I'm like, but yeah, like, that's like the education of the film, other than it's like, it's a sleazy thriller. in more so in the 50s one, which is fine. I love me some
Right.
sleazy noir thriller stuff.
Yeah, you're total sleaze.
Total sleaze. But yeah,
Yeah.
so actually I'll throw this out to you. Were you aware watching this that this film was not like shot at all in the city of Berlin? It was shot all on like sound stages, and it's like a studio city.
You can't tell that at all. There's a lot of shots where it seems like they're just out in streets for real.
Yeah.
I guess if you were like really paying attention to it, you could probably tell. But as a guy who's just enjoying the movie, I thought that a lot of it was just filmed like on location.
Yeah, I mean, I knew like I think right away, which I think like maybe is like something that would be like my my nitpick was like I don't like that it's not shot on location because
Sure.
I could tell because like I realized like in my mind I was like for 1931 there's no way that this film would look the way that it does, like the way the colors look and the consistency, they're like the skies aren't blown out white. They don't actually shoot the skies because there is no sky. They're in a giant
Yeah.
air like old air care or hangar bay. Essentially,
Hangar?
that's where they are.
Yeah.
Like, it's a hangar outside of Berlin where they filmed it, and it's like a built city for the purposes of filming movies. They wouldn't have been able to film that movie the way and have it look the way. It would be like a lot more grainier because they'd have to be using like a I guess lower ISO film or whatever to give it like more like a washed out look. It would look different. So it's too like to the credit of the movie, like it has to look a particular way and it looks great because of it. But I always like, I think I was mentioning before like how great it is to watch a movie that's shot on location, like Long Good Friday, like Sid and Nancy. Despite those movies not being like the best movies, they have like a real like presence to them. Whereas like that's one thing you could see about M is it doesn't have that presence. Where the remake, the 1951, it's actually shot on location in Los Angeles in Bunker Hill. Having played, I've never been to Los Angeles, the city, but I've played LA Noire, which does an amazing job of recreating Los Angeles of that era. And like I was like when I was watching, I'm like, oh, I remember driving up those steps once off Bunker Hill, and like it's like, oh wow, like it really is like fairly accurate in that video game. So I mean, like there's something to say about locations, but I think that's like a minor nitpick you could have with M, because at the same time, like in my friend's thing that he wrote, he really talked about how like it's like this story about like the city, and I've read other people talk about like how like you could view the city as as the protagonist of the film, which is always something I chuckle about. It's like people talk about. I think I wrote a paper myself about how Bernard Herrmann's score in Vertigo is like a character in the film. It's like the laziest film thing you can write.
Yeah, but it probably got you a decent grade.
Sure, I got that A.
You know what I just realized too? Something I wanted to. It's totally not related to what you were saying, but as you were talking about those things, you know what's something I bet people who write film studies courses on this movie now talk about?
What?
One of the reasons I really liked it, it made me super nostalgic about things that are lost to time. And what I mean by that is like the power of like newspaper and print, fucking pocket watches, landline phones, papers, access to information, stuff like that. Like I was totally just like watching it. I was like, man, I'm like that Woody Allen type of guy who's just like, I wish I was alive then.
I wish I lived in Weimar Republic, Berlin.
Yeah, like you're always yearning for like an old generation or something. But I was really like impressed by, or not impressed, I guess. Like I think nostalgic is the right word, where it's just like there's so many scenes that are like dedicated to people who are like hovering over a newspaper or reading it out loud to crowds and stuff like that, because that was their only source of information. That fucking guy pulls out 19 pocket watches and stuff like that. Like stuff like that just really dazzles me. I think it's so neat to see, Jer. I love it. I love it.
A long forgotten era of innocence.
Yeah.
But there's like really good reasons we kind of moved away from all those things. I mean, like my iPod is pretty sweet. I mean, I remember like even in 2005, I wanted a smartphone then, and they weren't invented for another like year and a half or whatever. But I wanted one then. I was like, I'm gonna get a Nintendo DS and buy like the like wireless cartridge game that you can get for it to use it. And, like it was like garbage. But it's like that was like I wanted that then. So I don't know. I don't maybe have that same nostalgia, particularly maybe in this film, because this film like depicts a pretty like terrible existence of just children disappearing, and like the police are powerless to find them. The underworld is actually better suited. And then you have like the streets are just covered and strewn with like World War I veterans that have been abandoned by the government, which is all like how it all helps lead to like the rise of the Third Reich in a mere like 2 years, which is like there's something to be said about like that backdrop of the film of like mob mentalities and sort of the way the police are conducting their investigation, and like this idea of like the death penalty, like in the case of a character like Peter Lorre's, which apparently I guess there's like the one thing that always gets brought up is like Joseph Goebbels actually has a diary entry about the film, and he was like, yeah, he's going to be working for us one of these days, but Fritz like never did. He actually fled Germany, went to America, because he's like, nope, I'm not one of these guys. But his wife, who he split up with, because I guess she like started like having sex with this like younger East Indian man.
Jesus.
But like she like basically she wound up working for the Nazi Party, and like paying them a bunch of money to basically keep her boyfriend alive and like other Indian guys around there. It just sounds messed up, and like I mean she got out of the war, and like I guess she got like some sort of medal because she wasn't like an evil Nazi, but sure. Yeah, there's all sorts of things there. Yeah, there's one film later. Actually, Testament of Dr. Moose will be interesting because that'll fall into that directors in the middle of divorce movies. I'm curious how women hold up in that particular movie, or probably the subsequent movie more so.
I look forward to your letterboxed list of movies that
I'm gonna make it.
Yeah,
I gotta do the research. I gotta have the time. There's like the one scene that like I really remembered from M, and when I was watching it again, I was like, does that scene actually happen in this movie, or am I like imagining another like silent film? And then went, oh no, there it is. It's when Peter Lorre's in the office building. And because I was like, what happens? Like, how did that happen in the movie? Like, how do we get to that scene? And then I'm like, oh yeah, because it turns into like this like Ocean's 11 type heist film where like the prize is a child killer.
Yeah, he is Andy Garcia's stash of money.
Oh,
it's very nice. Actually, that's actually one part. Like, if I had any like criticisms of this movie, it's I think where he's locked in the building, and then when they have the vault man at the police station, I think that stuff runs a little long. Like, you could trim that down for sure. That's my only real criticism of this is those two things. The rest of the movie I was totally on board with. My interest was focused completely, but when they were trying to find him in the building and then the police station scene afterwards, I was like, I was drifting a little bit, I guess I should say. But
yeah.
That's my only real criticism of the movie.
Yeah, I felt that too this time around. But then, like when I did that, like my third rewatch of it, when I was just like watching on the laptop, it went by really. The movie went by really smoothly. I think it's like once I kind of got down the structure of it and realized it's basically told in 9 parts, and each sequence like kind of doesn't ever overstay its welcome. You kind of know, okay, we have to do this scene to get to this scene, and then we have to do this and this. Like each thing. Like I think nowadays, like you could do that same story and like you would run out of time to fill up, like because now the editing is so much more concise and dense, and like, it dumps out like nuance or like character or anything like that. It just rushes right through. Another thing I guess I mentioned too is Otto Wernick. He's the guy who plays Inspector Lohman. We actually get to see him again playing the same role in Testament of Dr. Mabuse.
Ooh, sweet.
Yeah, so I wonder if we'll get that nice low-angle shot of his
junk. Oh God. Yeah, you get a really good shot of just his entire package just pushed to the side.
I do not understand that shot.
Yeah, why is it in there?
I have no idea. It's like so. I think it accentuates how exhausted he is. Like, because like at that point he's like, he's like all like leads have been like they're done. Everything's been expired. Like they've run out of angles. He's just like, oh, like now all we're waiting for is goddamn Becker to come back to his apartment and we can arrest him. But he's like just exhausted and tired and like smoking away. And then the guy comes in, hey, can you help him? Like ask like. Say that he killed the night watchman, so he'll like give up what the hell they were doing in that office building for. And he's like, oh, okay, something to do. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I was wondering if you were going to bring that up, but it is very bizarre because it's like the whole movie plays out, and then you just get this like crotch shot of this like mildly overweight like middle-aged guy, and you're like, what?
Yeah, and it's like, yep, there's his dick in those trousers.
Yeah, I wonder if it maybe old Fritz Long had a thing for Big
Schlong.
Willie Bowman. Fritz Schlong. Yeah, he had a thing for that obese man junk, and he was like, he's like, this is really gonna show economic struggle. And that's how he explained it to the actors. But really, he was just like, ooh, baby.
Oh, baby. One of my favorite lines from this film is, "Hey, stop snoring, you'll wake up the lice." That is the kind of film this is. I think
that's a Looney Tunes line.
Yeah,
for you.
I think you had a good screen cap too about like the smell of cheese, like the stink of cheese.
I had to rewind that because I thought it was so funny.
That's in the same sequence.
Yeah, because like dudes, like there's different tables of guys like opening up stuff. Like there's like a table of guys like basically going through garbage, and then there's a table of guys like opening up sandwiches, and the one guy's just like, oh god, this cheese stinks so good, and you're just like, hey, I guess, but you know what? People do like stinky cheese. I like the blue cheese every now and then, Jer.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very fun. I liked it a lot. There's also other fun things. Did you see that guy smoking a cigar in a pipe?
Yes.
I've never seen anything like that before.
Is that the wildest thing you've ever seen?
Yeah, it was like a whole cigar in a pipe, and I was just like, what the fuck? I didn't know you could do that. So it seems a little bit redundant. It's like just use one or the other.
No rules in 1931, I guess.
I guess not, man. But,
I guess we'd be remiss though to like not even like we haven't really talked about like Peter Lorre in this movie, like who like there is no movie without Peter Lorre, like because he's like I don't know because like he's like not even in this as much as you'd think. Like he like disappears for long periods, like the first. I don't know, 45 minutes or something like that. I don't think he's in this. Even. And then he shows up again. Like he's always kind of off in the corner, off to the side, writing a note or something. And then when he actually starts the trailing the girl, and then like you get that like him like trying to find his next victim. You get that whole process. And like there's the shot of him when he's like looking in the one store window, and there's like all these knives in the reflection that kind of circulate around his head, and then he catches like a view of her, and he just like basically like blows his load in his pants. That's the type of look he's got, and it's like Jesus. And like or that shot of him like looking in the mirror, making the faces like just distorting it, bulgy eyed motherfucker. And and then like his scene at the end, which like so I was like again, that documentary about the physical history of M, it's really amazing to watch like the battle days of like, well, unfortunately the Weinstein company still does this shit, but like like these companies that would take a film like say from Germany and then they'd hack it up for their particular market. So for instance, like for the French version, like there's just subtle things they would do. Like, so if there's like German text, like when they're looking at one of those like old like news like papers or whatever, want ads or like police things, they'd like replace that text with the French text, which is fine. But there's like one of the shots in that movie gets kind of like screwed up with it because that's the first time you see Peter Lorre in silhouette being cast on that poster, and they replaced it with French text, and then they had to shoot another guy wearing a fedora. So it's like, oh, that's crazy. And then I guess for like the end of the movie, Peter Lorre did his whole final scene in French for the French version of the film, and it's like shot a little differently. It's like the framing's a little bit off and like doesn't look the same. His performance is way different. Like it's far more like manic and shouty, like more of like French shouty angry man rather than like desperate, sad and like out of his mind in his native German. So it's like that kind of thing is, and then of course there's like a side by side between the performances. And it's like, wow, like that's really amazing watching the same actor do the exact same material in two different languages that I guess he's fluent in, but it just plays completely differently.
Could you imagine that today? Think about like your best actors and stuff like that. Be like, okay, do the same movie but in a different language.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't happen. But I mean, they would do different things. Like they would change like the nationality of the villains' countries and stuff like that. Because like they do that with like the Chinese releases of those Marvel movies. And then like the Weinsteins, they like to take movies from like Asia and just like re-edit them. Like, we don't need those 20 minutes. That won't keep the American audiences happy. We know what's best for people. They're not adults. We are.
It might be right.
Yeah, never are. Oh, and then they're dubbed, as well, which is actually kind of as bad as that. But then so one thing too is there's like in the middle of this documentary, there's like a big section that's dedicated to a one of those like Nazi propaganda films. I think it's like The Eternal Jew or something like that. And it's just like them just presenting like anything that's like interestingly made in German art is like being like, oh, this was because of the Jews and their nefarious influence on art and culture, and including physics. Because at one point, in this documentary, it refers to Albert Einstein as the relativity Jew.
Is that not what people call him now?
Not amongst my circle of friends.
No wonder I've been getting a lot of bad glances at work.
Mm-hmm. It's like, oh yes, like the relativity Jew. Oh, RJ.
Like, huh? Well, I also like that they have a pseudo Sigmund Freud in this movie.
Oh yes, they do. Good call.
You see, because he does this because of his wild sexual compulsions. He's even got like the tufts of hair on the side, and he's like, yeah, fun stuff.
So yeah, I guess like other notes on the M remake, the American remake, which I would like tell people check it out if you like M.
I'll watch it.
Yeah, it's like it's not too bad. It doesn't have like a great copy of it out there either. I think it's like kind of like just above VHS quality. It's got a bit more ramped up mob panic. Like there's more examples of like guys just like, oh hey, I'll help this girl who's slipping on her roller skates over to this step, and goes, what are you doing? What are you doing? We got the killer over here. Which I that stuff was always great. And it like I said, like it ties into like modern things about like, you know, there's like stories of like fathers who post photos of themselves with their like children in bathtubs, like on social media, and suddenly it's like, oh my god, that man's trying to rape those children, because it's only men who like never molest children. So it's like people still do that, and they don't need like a maniac stalking the city for 8 months. People are perpetually afraid of like the pedophile lurking around the corner, waiting to get their kids.
Rightfully so.
Yeah. And I guess
I'm always on the look for those guys, Jared.
Well, I mean, it ties right back into that particular group we've mentioned before on this very podcast, the creep catchers. And their righteousness. And there's like, I think recently there's like the one guy north of us who just like, he like really wanted to get this guy, and like the guy wasn't biting, but he kept like pushing and to a point where like the guy showed up kind of just to like stop these messages, and the guy's like, see, I told you, you're a sicko. And then like he has now since been charged with harassment, because it's like,
of course,
it's just, oh my god, people are deranged when it comes to this this particular dark chapter in humanity of just, this thing that happens. It's horrible, but
I'll tell you about it sometime.
Yeah, you'll tell me all about it. Other thing I checked out was I watched, there's a William Friedkin directed interview with Fritz Lang, with William Friedkin doing the interviewing. It's like from 1974, so like just like I think right around Exorcist time.
Is he wearing the Pacino's clothes from Cruisin' in the interview?
No, not yet. He hasn't found that side yet. But it's like, it's kind of an underwhelming presentation. Like it's very like, it's just black and white. It's shot in black and white, and like the audio on the documentary is like very quiet, and it's just talking heads. And it's like there's some sort of like some artful direction of a camera panning within this conversation of just two guys. But I found like Fritz Lang very like evasive. Like he'd be asked a question, because like one of the big things that I would mention, I guess like going back to like Peter Lorre's performance in like the film too, is like did you find it like interesting that like you're kind of like put in the position where you're like empathizing with Laurie, like you're kind of like you're kind of rooting for him, like to get away, like when he's like being trapped, like you would like any sort of like underdog, even though you know what they've done, but you've never actually been shown what he's done, so it's kind of left to your imagination. So it's not like hard facts that we know anything. So it's like actually like a fairly sympathetic portrayal of a monster. And so like William Friedkin asks Fritz Lang about this, and he's like, well, what are you talking about? like I want to leave it to the audience. Like he seemed to not get what he was being asked, or the one thing that became clear after watching that like bit about like the Nazi propaganda film, which was included on this documentary, because at one point like the Nazis they were like kind of saying like, here's an example of a Jew named Peter Lorre who's trying to show that it's the victim's fault, and they're showing the sequence of him like his monologue in that basement as like this film's championing like child killers, and it's like, wow, like I mean you could go in that direction. So I think maybe Fritz Lang remembered that and thinking that like William Friedkin's like asking him those questions, and he's kind of still sensitive to his like old accusations from Nazis that he was like sympathizing with a child killer.
Right.
But so I mean, like I thought that was like interesting in the film, like because it's like the film makes like all these like really different stretches, I guess, like like there's no clear morality, there's no clear answers, there's no the police and the gangsters are working separately from one another with similar goals, in the sense that like the police kind of want to stop these things from happening, and the gangsters want this to stop happening because it's costing them money and bringing undue attention to them, much like the police. They don't like the attention of the public and being yelled at by chiefs of like, you gotta catch this guy, what are you doing, you need to do your work. That's right there. Yeah.
No, I feel you, man. Like, that's interesting. I wonder why he was so skittish about it.
Like I said, like I think that maybe it was those like that history of it being used in like the 30s, and like he was like, maybe people were like, I don't know, people were turned off by it, and then he would be like, what are you talking about? And it's like, well, it's like filmmaking, like I'm trying to show both sides. Maybe he got tired of answering that question that way, and now he just like he doesn't get why people would ask it.
Okay.
I mean,
yeah, that makes sense.
And like I said earlier, like Fritz Lang, like he like would say things that like were like not true. Like he just like, I mean, he was an old guy probably when he started being interviewed about this stuff by like the 70s guys. So his like memory probably wasn't this razor sharp about it. But then there's other times where he starts laying out like scenes, and he's like, oh no, he can visualize this. He knows exactly what he's doing, because obviously, I mean, his whole career is about like working in film and like working in a visual language. So I mean, he's still probably a sharp guy, but who knows? Maybe the story that he told himself about how things were made just is not in line with what he thought at one point. So it's all up for debate, I guess. And he's dead now, so there's no asking him. There's no follow-up questions for him.
I was going to say, much like last week with Orson Welles, and I'll ask him in the afterlife, and I'll report back.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. Any other thoughts? Spare change?
Not really. This movie rules.
Yeah.
I liked it a lot. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you know what? There's some people in this world who hate this movie.
Fuck those people.
Oh my God. So, half a star from Savvy Bulge.
Oh, maybe he's named after that camera shot.
So this is the only half-star review for this film.
Okay.
I had no patience for reading a movie and enduring 100-year-old black and white visuals. The story plodded along, and eventually I couldn't take the screaming anymore. But ultimately, it was a good experience, because it might have been the only time in my life when I was veritably thankful we won the war.
What? Ew. So the only reason he didn't like it was because it was black and white and had subtitles.
It's old. And I'm glad we got those Nazi bastards that didn't have anything to do with the making of this movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Ratson King gave this 2 stars. Oh man, I love watching old movies, but this one was immensely boring. If you like to watch different groups of people have boring conversations while they are sitting at a table, then you are going to love this movie. When the biggest reason to keep watching this movie is because you want to know if the movie is going to have a twist at the end, then that's probably a bad sign. I know that this movie is being regarded as one of the best classic mystery movies out there, but I didn't see it, and I can recommend some way better classic mystery movies than this one. Murder on the Orient Express, for example.
Jarrett, when you read these things, it makes me so fucking mad.
I know. I don't think anything will ever top that one for the Seven Samurai. like nothing ever, like that's like the pinnacle. I recommend folks who haven't listened to the Seven Samurai episode, check that one out, because that's got like the best hate I've ever read. It's just so wrong. But
wrong.
So Savannah Diebold, maybe she's going to give that one a run for its money. 2 stars.
Oh,
I don't know. I didn't particularly like this movie, but it wasn't terrible. I felt uncomfortable watching a child molester catch his prey, but I really liked the idea of a bunch of thugs catching him instead of police. It brought a sense of justice to it because other criminals and homeless were getting together to catch this predator. It was a little slow, and the predator seemed too weak at the end. The ending was also sudden and weird. There was no closure to the movie. We know he got captured, but we never find out what happened to the children he caught or his punishment. It just ended, which I did not like at all.
I'm not really down with this lady's interpretation. Like, she says she doesn't, or this person doesn't like it. That's fine. But I feel like it's like they're just mostly uncomfortable with the content. And I really like the ending too.
Yeah.
That's a huge, like, just even bigger bonus for me. I think that's wicked, man. I like it like that.
No, it's like that final shot
like
too, where like that mob of criminals are about to run forward and just like tear him apart, and then there's like been this weird whistling sound, and you realize, and that's when then you don't know what it is, and then they all suddenly stop, and they put their hands up, and then there's this delay, and then finally Safecracker is like, fine, and then you're like. And then they cut to Peter Lorre, who's like looking at them, terrified. And then this hand just comes out of frame and just puts itself on his shoulder. And you're like, oh, the police are here. He's saved, kind of. Yeah. And then he's going to be put into the system. And who knows what's going to happen next. But yeah, that's like another thing. People, if you follow us on Instagram, you'll see a bunch of photos and images I put up about this movie. One particular one that I threw up there was this painter that's like a German expressionist painter from the period called Otto Dix. His stuff is like amazing, and like it's like all about like ugly people and like veterans and just cripples, and fantastic painter, like really depicting the world in a way that you don't expect in the European tradition of just like hideousness. And he embraced it full on, which is something that kept coming back to my mind when I was like taking these screen caps of these like real lived in faces of people, of these actors. Because apparently another thing too is Fritz Lang, for some of these criminals roles, he actually hired real criminals.
Awesome.
So that gives it that
awesome.
air of authenticity, I think. That maybe it's like that offsets the studio city that they were filming in, using real people, real faces. But maybe you didn't agree with Savannah's take, but maybe you'll find something in Kevin Hawkins' review, which he gave 2 stars to M. M stands for meh. So maybe this film was ahead of its time, and I can appreciate that. Thanks, Kevin. But that doesn't mean I have to love it. First of all, I think Fritz Lang took way too long explaining the fact that the police had no evidence, literally 10 minutes plus. Second, I personally felt like none of the characters had depth, so I didn't care about anyone in particular, except maybe the mother in the first 5 minutes. Because of the lack of depth, I wasn't really on board with anyone's motives, specifically of criminals trying to catch the main villain. The main thing that actually sparked my interest was the concept of one evil being greater than another, but even that was kind of glossed over. In the end, I put this on the same level as City of God, in that it kind of just exists, and I don't have feelings for it one way or another.
What?
City of God.
Why? Oh my! I don't understand why people hate that fucking movie. That movie's really good. I don't. Oh my god! Yeah. But if he had ended it just at M stands for meh, I would say 5-star review.
5-star review. You're wrong.
5-star review.
Yeah, I know. I included it just because I read that first bit. Meh.
Such frustration, Jarrett.
Such frustration.
Much hate.
Oh, I'll leave us on one final hot take. I was really like becoming aware when I was watching this movie, like, and taking screenshots of like, there's these inventory shots of like, like when they're just like looking at things and they're panning over it, and I was like, I wonder if that's like something that like wound up like starting here and then wound up in Wes Anderson movies, because Wes Anderson, he loves the inventory shot.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. I thought it was really funny when they do the inventory of all the weapons from the people in the bar, and there's like there's a stack of brass knuckles, and I thought that was really funny for 1930, like, or 1931. I don't know why, but I was like, did they fucking have brass knuckles then? Like, and if so, did so many people of them have them? It made me. I really liked it. I thought it was fun.
Yeah, I mean, brass knuckles are relatively easy. They're a lot easier than guns, I think, to like pass around, because there's no firing mechanism. There's not much that can go wrong. You just put it on your fist and then you punch away.
Well, I think I was more impressed with the fact that they had them. Not that, like, it's like I didn't know brass knuckles were that old, like 1930. I thought it was I mean,
Oh,
I don't know,
man.
maybe like a 50s thing.
Oh man, I think brass knuckles are probably quite old.
Medieval.
Oh, let's look it up. Yeah, I mean it's a pretty
Probably medieval.
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 Knuckle busters.
I knew a guy who made wooden knuckles one time.
Mm-hmm. Well, they date back to like Nihon Sikhs. Sikhs used them in the 18th century. So that's probably.
Well, there you go.
And then, yeah, they probably made their way through colonial means. They showed up. They're being shown. Their wood ones were in the American Civil War. Yeah, they're.
I bet the Wishmaster had some.
He wished he did.
Ooh, shit. Well, okay. I guess you got me. But anyways, I thought it was funny to see brass knuckles on the table.
There you go. Yeah, good. Excellent.
Good.
Well, folks, that's M. Another one in the can. A good one, finally, for RJ.
Finally.
And after this break, we're going to find out if RJ's going to keep on being happy or not.